All right, welcome back to another episode here of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool.
Hey, and this is episode 4. So we call this show Persuasion by the Pint. Now, that doesn't always mean we're drinking a pint of beer.
That's correct.
So what do we have on tap today?
We reserve the right to go smaller.
That's right.
Same potency, maybe a little smaller volume, right? So yeah, this is one of my favorite brands of whiskey, Suntory. It's a Japanese whiskey.
Okay.
So they have, this one is called, I don't know how to say it exactly, but Hibiki, Hibiki,
okay,
by Suntory Whiskey. Another one that they have that I really, really like is Toki, Toki.
All right.
And for the price, it is dollar for dollar, I think, one of the best whiskeys I've ever had. And I've had a Macallan 18-year Scotch. And the $30, this one's about $65 a bottle, depending on where you get it. The other one I'm talking about is, around $30, $35, depending on where you get it. So, but both of these are really good. This one's a little smokier.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had that. But I love, this is a very high quality whiskey for the money. It's pretty amazing.
It's very good.
The copy on the back of the box is really good too.
Okay, let's talk a little.
It's really good. So, Suntory Whiskey, founded in 1923, 3 generations. So it gets into some of that. But it says Hibiki is the, and I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm sure I'm butchering that. But is the paragon of harmony. Launched in 1989 to commemorate Suntory's philosophy of living in harmony with people and nature. The name Hibiki means resonance in Japan. Or in Japanese, Suntory whiskey, Hibiki resonates with the subtleties of nature, infused by the 24 seasons of Japan's traditional calendar and reflected in the 24 facets of its bottle design. So it's got 24 edges around the bottle. Okay. I think that's cool when people tie in their bottle and their there's a story. So when you're having a whiskey and you have somebody over, you talk about influence and persuasion. That's what this show is all about. One of the ways to do that is to look smarter than the rest of the people in the room. So if you can talk about the bottle, how it's representative of Japan's 24 seasons and all that, you better find out what those seasons are before you do that. But it says it's a noble blend of malt and grain whiskeys from Suntory's globally acclaimed. There's 3 different distilleries that I can't pronounce. Blended to create a sense of W-A, which means a oneness, which unveils a full orchestra of flavors and aroma. So...
now, this is the first time you've had...
This is the first time I've had this one. I've had the Toki, which is really good, but this is the first time I've had this particular one. Very different. Like, the other one is a little bit smoother, almost if you ever had like an Asahi beer, a Japanese beer that's very dry. Yep. The other whiskey's like that. It's got a very clean, neat finish. Yeah. It doesn't linger. This one has a little bit smokier flavor, but even right at first, this I think has a smoky...
Reminds me of one of the scotches that I drink or I've had in the past, and I'm trying to remember the name. It's not Glenlivet, but that has a smoky oak. I typically like the Glenlivet, but sometimes I'll go a different route.
Yeah, and one of the guys at the liquor store that I went to said that Suntory gets a lot of their malts and stuff and their grains from Irish Scotch whiskey country. Yeah, he said it's really a Scotch whiskey. Yeah, owned by a Japanese company. So
makes sense.
That's why you get the good flavor, like a nice Scotch whiskey. Sure, but at a Japanese import price. So that's what we're drinking today for this episode. And what are we talking about today?
We are talking about influence. We got a couple of books. We got a PDF or a report that we're going to be talking about. We got Instant Influence. Who's the author there?
This is Michael V. Pantalone. Isn't that Spanish for like pants or something? Pantalone?
Pantalones. I believe you are correct, sir.
Psychologist and research scientist at Yale School of Medicine. So smart guy.
Los Pantalones. You are correct. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Good. Not too bad for failing Spanish in high school twice.
So let's start, because I've got this. I'm pulling this book up on Kindle, and you and I both we've read that. I had to kind of refresh my memory because I read probably halfway through the book a few months back, but let's kind of give a synopsis, and we'll dig into some of the key takeaways.
Yeah. So the subtitle is really, and it's actually got two subtitles. It's got a subtitle in blue and then the subtitle for those of you watching on video, in yellow. So the first subtitle is How to Get Anyone to Do Anything Fast. And the backstory of this book is this guy did rounds in the ER at Yale, one of the Yale hospitals and some other hospitals. And they would have drug addicts and alcoholics and other people come into the ER who were in serious life-threatening, situations, making bad decisions, things like this. So he was like, you don't have time to sit through and counsel these people through 6 months of counseling or putting them in an AA course or whatever. Because if they leave the emergency room and go back out into the world and they haven't decided to change, if the doctor can't influence them or persuade them to do something different, they're going to end up right back there, or worse, they're going to be dead. Right. So this was literally this book, and the technique in this book and the steps that he talks about were literally born out of this need and frustration to get people to make a life-changing decision very fast. And I think, he talks about 7 minutes in this book, because that's about what they had to deal with the patient. Right. So that's a pretty bold. It is. That's why I bought the book. Because instant influence is good, but when you see, 7 minutes, and then when you read, even the back cover, and he talks about that and kind of the the inside flap, and you get that sense of that ER. It's like, wow, that's intriguing. I need to know more. Yeah. So that's why I picked up the book.
Situations like that you can almost understand, because you put yourself in a life and death situation, and things move fast, and you're almost forced to make life or death decisions just like that, because I know my brother-in-law works in he works in the medical industry, and it can be very stressful. Those
moves fast.
Yeah.
Well, I know the other thing I thought about was, okay, here's an alcoholic, a drug addict coming into the ER. They're in a bad situation. Yeah. You don't get that way because you've gotten that way because there's a series of decisions you've made over and over. In one of our last episodes, we talked about consistency, and human behavior. So if you've survived it, no matter how thinly you survived, there's a part of your brain that says, okay, I can survive this. Yeah. So to get someone to change that habit, persuade them or influence them to change that habit, can be very difficult because their brain says, no, I'm fine. Yeah. I'm still alive, so it must be working. Yeah. As crazy as that is, that's how our brains work. Yeah. Like, if we survive it, it's okay. Yeah. The only thing that's not okay is what we don't survive. Right. Yeah. And especially if you do it more than 2 or 3 times. Sure. That's why it takes bigger and bigger hits of, dopamine and adrenaline to get thrills as you move forward. Because if you do it once, it's like, this is safe. It's comfortable. Yeah. So that's what really fascinated me about the book. So we can jump in and talk about, it's really, the book is just a lot of, like most books, there's a lot of fluff and story to drive home the point, but it really boils down to 6 questions that he asks people, and we're going to be giving away the whole thing, so it's kind of like a book summary here for this one. But and to me, there was 2 or 3 questions that just really jumped out from my experience as a salesperson and a copywriter, a coach. That there's 3 particular questions, and I'll say what those are in just a minute, that really jumped out at me that I think can be useful in so many situations. Okay. So anything you want to add to that before we...
One thing he says, and this may, as a foundation, he talks about instant influences based on 3 principles. And I'll read those real quick. Yep. No one absolutely has to do anything. The choice is always yours. Right. Everyone already has enough motivation, which is true, Focusing on any tiny bit of motivation works much better than asking about resistance. Yeah. So,
which again kind of goes with our idea of consistency.
Yeah.
Right. You know, if we can find that one element that they're already doing well, we can build on that, then it helps. That second point, though, read that again, because that was...
Yeah, I had to think when I read that initially, because it says everyone already has enough motivation.
Well, you know, we talked about Eugene Schwartz, the famous copywriter. He talked about, you know, you can't create desire.
Yeah.
You have to tap into the desire that's already
Absolutely.
there. It's kind of another way of saying that.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me. It's
Right.
like the motivation's there. We just have to find it and tap into it.
Right.
And
our mistake is oftentimes trying to redirect and find a different motivation than somebody.
Or bring our motivation.
Yeah, bring our
in.
motivation and put it on them, you know.
For us, it's obvious, like, you're going to ruin your life. Well, you know, maybe they're escaping something in their life that they need to get away from. So their motivation is 180 degrees from what ours might be.
Right. And when they don't see our motivation, then we call it a lack of motivation, which it was incorrect.
Yeah.
They have a motivation, but it's theirs. They have a motivation to continue on their path.
Yeah, it's the difference between, and I think we touched on this before, and I'm sure we'll touch on it 1,000 times again in the future, but it can't be said enough times. Anytime you're thinking about yourself in persuasion and influence more than you're thinking about the other person, you're going to run into some resistance. You're not going to get the results that you want. You have to constantly be
talked about
reminding
that last
yourself.
week with liking, the principle of liking, you know, understanding first, you know, like Stephen Covey has said brilliantly, seek first to understand,
right?
Then to be understood. You know, you seek first to understand where they're coming from, what their motivation is.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
It's amazing how all these principles, when you get into sales and persuasion and influence, and then you get into the personal development, self-development world, you know, like we'll talk about in the next episode, you know, cults and some of this, you know, it's amazing how it's all connected.
Yeah,
and it's all connected because it's human nature.
Right.
Like humans change very slowly.
Yeah.
It looks like we're changing fast and we're sure we can fly in airplanes and, you know, go to the moon, go to Mars, whatever, invent technologies, but the basis of human nature is very, very slow to change.
Yeah.
If it changes at all. You know, so
Can I share a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody loves stories. That's a good way to influence people.
Yeah, real quick before we get into it. So I was meeting with a company this week, and I was talking to one of their managers who had, and it falls along the lines of trying to, you know, motivate somebody against their will instead of really tapping into what they want. But this particular manager had a sales manager for their company who decided to change things up in a territory and tried to put a different shift one of their salespeople to a different location and put somebody else to handle a territory. Well, one particular company they worked with, they'd done business with for years, balked at it because they had developed a relationship with this other salesperson that was now told that we're shifting your territory and moving it to a different, so you won't be covering this account anymore.
Right.
Well, immediately the company who had developed a relationship with the one salesman who is now no longer handling the account, the manager of the company called and really was frustrated. Why would you take this guy? I've been working with him, got a good relationship, and the sales manager argued with him and said, "This is just the way we're doing things." Yeah. So, you know, and finally, you know, the company president had to get involved and tell the sales manager, "What are you doing? If he wants to continue working with that salesperson, we're not going to argue with the customer. We're going to work with this customer and we can work around it. But you don't ever tell somebody, no, that's not what you should, you know, that's not what you want. We know what you want."
Right. There's the old saying that the customer's always right.
Right.
And I've heard that, but I heard another saying that's so much more accurate. And that is, it's not that the customer is always right, but it's that the customer is always the customer.
That's right. They may not be right. Yeah, you're exactly right, because they're not always right, but they're still the customer.
They're still the customer. So
and their motivation, in his case, his motivation was that, listen, my motivation is that I love and I want to continue doing business with you guys, but I've got an established relationship with this sales guy of 15, 20 years, and you're suddenly all of a sudden going to put somebody different that's going to be calling on us from time to time when I've worked with this guy forever, just because this sales manager has a desire to change things up. And, Yeah,
it seems to me that what would be going on there, or one possibility for what could be going on there, is the company is afraid somebody's... Usually the problem with any customer, salesperson, company is that once there's established relationship, is that people are afraid if anything changes, a ball's going to get dropped.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's not the best situation, but everything's working, like we talked about earlier with people's brains and stuff.
Sure.
Companies are the same way. Like, my guess is yes, he likes the guy, but there's probably a deep-seated fear there that if somebody comes in here and sends us the wrong stuff, or we have to re-explain things, there's a chance that something could go wrong, and something could get dropped, and I'm going to look bad. The company,
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked, way back in the day when I used to do, right after I got out of the military, an Army buddy of mine invited me down to work with his dad's company. We did conveyor belts for big wood yards and paper mills and things like that. And we would go in and put belts on these 400-yard long, conveyor belts.
Oh, wow.
Big, thick belts that were 60 inches wide, weighed tens of thousands of pounds when they were spooled up. But the thing was, like, nobody cared at Weyerhaeuser or GP or the different companies how much it cost for us to come in there.
Sure.
It was minuscule compared to what it cost them to be down, because it took about 6 to 8 hours to swap out a belt, because you have to cut it, you have to take it off, then you have to tow the new one on, basically.
Oh yeah,
because it's thousands of pounds that are going usually uphill, and then you have to get the two ends that are left, because you can't just slide it on like a rubber band.
Right.
So you have to cook them together, called vulcanizing. Totally random, I know, but we'll get somewhere. And so that process could take 6 to 8 hours if everything went smooth.
Right.
Well, that 6 to 8 hours to shut down one of those conveyor belts could cost $50,000 to $60,000
easily. Yeah.
In lost profits, lost production. So the fact that we were coming in and charging $10,000, $15,000 was a third or a fourth or a tenth of the cost.
Small potatoes compared
being
to
there.
Yeah.
So they were more concerned about not price or anything else. They were more concerned about, the reason they wouldn't switch from us is because they're like, okay, every time these guys come in, they're done in 6 to 8 hours.
Sure.
We can move on. So if we had a new crew, like, all the foremen got really nervous.
Right.
They're like, oh, who's the new guy? Because, this can't take 12 hours. Like, this has to be done.
Right. They're afraid because, that extra time is costing them serious production.
$20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
Absolutely.
So that change can be very disconcerting for people. And that's kind of what this talks about is you're asking someone to make a change that can be very uncomfortable.
Yep.
And regardless of their reason for it being uncomfortable, whether it's rational or not, is irrelevant.
It doesn't matter.
It's their
reason.
It's their reason.
Yeah.
So, which leads us perfectly into the first question.
Yep.
So the very first question that this guy learned to ask, and he talks about it in the book if you want the backstory about how he kind of developed this through trial and error and different things. But the first thing he asks is simply, why might you change?
Yeah.
Like, if you were going to change, why might you change?
Right.
And if you think about it, there's so much going on in that question.
Yeah.
There's so much good psychology in that question, because you're not saying that you will change.
Right.
Like, I think the first principle you said there, the first key foundational principle was...
no one absolutely has to do anything.
Right. So you're still empowering that person.
Yeah.
You're not taking away their power right off the go.
Right.
You're not telling them they're wrong. And this is a big thing in coaching as well. A big part of coaching that I do is persuading and influencing people to show up differently in their life.
Yeah.
And I have to do that usually through questions. You can't do that by telling someone that they should be doing this or shouldn't be doing that. That might work for 24 hours or something, or even accountability. It might work out of guilt or something, but it's not going to create lasting change.
No.
So yeah, what do you hear when you hear that question? Why might you change?
Why might you change? Why is a very important question. It's everyone has a why in their life, why they're doing something. I think it's essential to get to the bottom of why. What's the motivating factor in anyone's life to be doing something? Because I think about that book. The book Start With Why. I forget.
Simon Sinek.
Yep. And very good book, by the way. But I think everybody understanding someone's own motivating factor in doing something is one of the most crucial questions that we can ask. Because outside, if we don't understand, if we don't get to the bottom of that, how do we intend to move them in the right direction or help them? If we don't understand what's their motivating factor. Our motivating factor, like we're just talking about, is sometimes different, and we don't see it. Sometimes we think we're seeing it in their, I guess in the same, we think we have the same motivating factor as they do, but if we ask the right questions, sometimes we find out we don't.
Most of the time.
Believe me, and when you're dealing with teenagers, you know this.
Oh yeah.
Asking. You do a lot of asking why, for sure, or you should. Finding out what a person's motivating factor.
I think the biggest misconception around persuasion and influence is that it's telling instead of asking.
Bingo.
And bringing up.
We've been told for years in salesmanship that a salesman is out there telling people what they, it's like they're hypnotizing people, into buying or purchasing something that they really don't want or they don't need. We've been told that for years. That's what salespeople do. They just they sell you something you don't want.
But the best salespeople ask questions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so they ask questions, and every one of these steps except one is a question.
Yeah.
The one step that's not a question does basically the same thing as a question, which we'll get to later, which is step 4. So first is why might you change? So, whether you're asking a teenager to, stop doing whatever they're doing, hey, I'm not crazy about this, but I've got my reasons, but let me ask you, if you were going to change, why might you change?
Right.
Why might you change your study habits from C's and D's to A's?
Yeah.
And then, they'll probably give you a reason, and it's probably going to be a reason you haven't thought of.
Sure.
Like it's going to be completely from their worldview, which will be different than what yours is.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing is why might you change? The next thing is how ready are you to change on a scale from 1 to 10?
Right.
And this is really not that important of a question in this thing, because it's setting up the next question. You're kind of setting people up for the next question, which I think is the most powerful question. One of the 2 most powerful questions I was talking about. So why might you change? Okay, great. You probably want to acknowledge that if you were in a conversation with someone, repeat it back to them, basic, good listening type skills. And then how ready are you to change? On a scale of 1 to 10, Jonathan, where 1 is not ready at all and 10 means I'm totally ready to change. Let's say it's weight loss or whatever. So, if I owned a gym and somebody came in, the first thing I might ask is, why might you change the way your body looks right now?
Yeah.
Well, because I want this, or this, right? Okay, great. I hear you saying this, this, and this. Well, how ready are you to change on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not ready at all? Obviously you're probably above a 1 because you're here.
Sure.
But 10, I'm totally ready. Nothing's going to stop me. Like, where are you in that spectrum? I'm a 5 or 6, right? Most people are going to give you 4, 5, probably above 5, but below 7.
Yep.
That's just how.
Because they want people to know that they are motivated, but not to.
I don't want to go all in just yet. you have to understand that about people.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
The answer is irrelevant at this point because we're still leaving control in their hands.
Sure.
Like, we're not trying to tell them that they're wrong. Oh, no, your score should be a 9 or else we're not going to we're not working together.
Right.
That's a very confrontational, and that's not going to get anybody results. It's not going to get you a client. It's not going to get them results. But the next question I think is brilliant. So let's say you picked 6. The next question is, why didn't you pick a lower number? And that is a total reframe from what most people would expect. It's like a, whether it's NLP or whether it's just, contrarian or however you want to look at it.
Right.
It's a very powerful, like, just total 180 of what I think most people would expect is going to happen. So why didn't you pick a lower number? So if they picked a 1, which I think is, he has a note here, but I honestly don't think anybody would ever.
Most people would
pick a 1. There's going to be a few just totally stubborn people that just pick 1 just to irritate you.
Right. Well, you think about what we talked about last week in the principles, commitment and consistency. When people lay out a number, then they have to.
Yeah, they have to justify.
They have to justify
one way or the other.
Yeah.
And instead of asking them to justify, well, why didn't you pick if they pick 6, why didn't you pick 9?
Right.
Well, now they've got to defend their lower number.
Bingo. Yeah.
And be consistent with that instead of being consistent with change. So you're actually, by asking them, if you start putting them in the position of you should have picked a higher number or why didn't you pick a higher number, you're actually putting them on the defensive and getting them to reinforce the bad behavior.
Yep.
And that's why I think this is so brilliant. I never really thought of that that way before I read this book. If I didn't get anything else from this book, that would be super powerful. So then he moves into number 4, which is imagine you've changed. So this is when you ask someone, and we use this in copy a lot.
Sure.
The Dan Sullivan question, if you're familiar with that starts with imagine. And we could probably do a whole show on the Dan Sullivan question. Right. But it lights up a different part of your brain. It gets people kind of out of the current and into the future. It's a very future projecting type thing. It's, what's the term we use in copywriting about the future pacing? Yeah. So, you're future pacing something. You're getting them to imagine something in the future. So imagine you've changed. What would the positive outcomes be? So now you're literally getting them to use a different part of their brain that can imagine a different future. Right. Which is really powerful on all kinds of levels. It's what storytelling is about in a lot of cases. There's just so much there. So I think that's really powerful. And then, from there, that middle section is really critical. Because now you've got them in the right frame of mind. You've turned their frame of mind completely 180. And then the next one, it's kind of the wrap up. It's why are those outcomes important to you? So it's dipping back into that why for them that we talked about just a minute ago. And then the final step is where you give them back control and you give them the authority in their own life. And you say, what's the next step, if any? Yeah. And you let them off the hook. The if any is important. Like, don't leave out the if any. Yeah. Like, what's the next step, if any? Yeah. Like, you're still, even though they committed, in a way to making a change, you still want to give them an out so that they can own it. Yeah. And there's a great principle in coaching that we talk about. It's a child. There's an adult-child relationship, and then there's an adult-adult relationship. And most of the world is living in an adult-child relationship. Even managers at companies treat their people under them as children and tell them what to do and trick them into buying in on an idea or a time frame for a project to be done or things like that. When what's most effective, and this goes back, you mentioned Stephen Covey early, this goes back to win-wins. Yeah. It's amazing how that book that is now 30 years old is just so spot on. Right. It's incredible.
It's right up there with Cialdini's influence,
Yeah, those two. You could read those 2 books over and over and really know, 95% of, if not more, of like most everything else is a derivative of those.
Yeah.
And you could go back further and find books that are, that those came from. But as far as a package, those two books are just so powerful. So that's the process of instant influence.
So here's a challenge that I see, and I think this book is really good. But let's play devil's advocate, because
Absolutely.
there's always somebody's going to say, and I'll position this in terms of a parent or a teacher, where you're trying to influence students or trying to influence your kids, because it gets pretty difficult at that point when you're looking at autonomy, giving them autonomy to make decisions. And case in point, my wife and I have talked about this, and we've gone through a lot of books together in terms of, how to go about dealing with teenagers. And one of the ones that we've gone through recently, I think it's called The Respect Effect, but it's basically, as your teenager, giving them autonomy to make decisions. As a parent, it's very difficult to watch your kids fail,
Right.
and so you're trying to still dictate things, and that's where the problem is. You're not giving them that autonomy to make those decisions and to let them and to assure them. Because we can always say, you've got the autonomy, and then we hover over them and say, no, that's the wrong one.
You're free. We trust you. Go out, have a good time, but then you put a tracker on their car.
Yeah, exactly.
There's technology. You can put a tracker on their car, on their
Absolutely.
cell phone, and all that stuff. And that's something we chose, with our kids. My kids is now 18 and 23.
Yeah.
We chose not to do that when all their friends were doing that. How that turns out.
Yeah.
It's still left to be unseen, and there's going to be some mistakes made. There's going to be some second guessing of ourselves, my wife and I. There's things that have happened that I'm not going to get into on this podcast.
Oh yeah.
But that made us second guess that. But I think in the end, I do believe that is the better way.
Absolutely.
And that's my opinion. I'm 100% open to being wrong about that. But
I agree. But I guess, it is a challenge but it's not only a challenge as a parent or a teacher, or insert yourself in any situation. In business, sometimes you are looking for XYZ outcome,
right.
And instead you're realizing that's, you can't force people into that, what you want. You have to look at what their motivation is. Obviously respect that, but then assure them, hey, you have the autonomy. You have, you are making the decision. I'm not pushing you in any direction.
Yeah, and there's to play the devil's advocate. I mean, obviously when when a child is 8,
yeah,
that's different than when they're 18 or 17 even, because there's just a not knowing at all, as opposed to a learning.
Right.
Like you don't want some people to learn and it's at the risk of their health or life.
Yeah.
As opposed to just the repercussions of a bad decision, which you kind of have to sometimes let people go through.
Sure.
So it does go back. I think there is some age thing there when we're talking about, persuading influence or giving up control, like it talks about in the book, or giving people the final decision, like it talks about in the book. There is some age stuff. But in most of the situations that we're talking about with sales or with other things, to give people back that control builds a ton of trust and rapport, which are things we talked about with from Cialdini's book. So there's obviously going to be exceptions to all these things because we live in a world that's full of quirks and all kinds of wormholes and everything else.
Sure.
So I think it's important to be flexible. But in my experience, in my life, I would have to say that giving people the final choice, even if it doesn't work out in my best interest, is the better way to go.
Yeah.
And if I have to come back around again, I'm going to have more respect and rapport from that person.
Bingo.
Because I gave them. So it is taking a long view.
Yeah.
It's not best for quarterly results. It's not best for in the moment necessarily, but it is, I think, better long term.
Yeah. And it's very difficult. I think it's extremely, we can get into personalities, type A personalities, and probably have a more difficult, probably more difficulty with this concept, in applying it than anyone, because they're
being a type A and giving away
giving
control.
that authority, giving that
would be
control
tough.
back, because
Right.
they're control freaks and so forth. So it's a, but this is a good stopping point. Maybe on the on our next episode, we can kind of maybe summarize our thoughts on the book and get into some of the other stuff that we wanted to talk about on the report that we want to mention.
Right. Yeah.
Cults.
We've got an incredible.
What is it? Halloween's coming up on us, and we're talking about cults.
Absolutely. We'll switch from whiskey to a seasonal beverage.
I like it.
And we'll pick up on.
I like it.
That'll be episode 5.
Okay. Sounds great. Hey, thanks for listening, as always. And you can catch us again over at Persuasion by the Pint. Now we're on iTunes, Stitcher Radio. You can find us there. And we'd love to hear your comments. If you visit the website, leave some comments. We're always we're open to suggestions, Sean. We'll take comments on topics that we want to discuss. This is one of our favorite things to talk about, not to mention a beverage.
Yeah.
There's always.
And by the way, if you're famous, like we'll bring you into the conversation.
Yeah, right.
Like you can actually join us on Skype or something. Bring your list.
Yeah, bring your list. Bring your list.
And bring your own beverage, because we can't fax it to you.
BYOB, bring your own beverage, or suggest a beverage to us in the comments.
Absolutely.
And we'll definitely, if we haven't had it already, we'll be sure to test it and feature that on our show. So thanks for listening. Until next time, we'll see you. Thanks.
Cheers.